Chapter 28. Wednesday mid-afternoon. Doreen forced Muggs back up to the house. She couldn't understand his behavior, and it was distressing. Now she was worried about Mac too. What if Muggs understood Mac was in some kind of danger? She couldn't get the thought out of her mind as she kept pushing Muggs, who didn't want to go in the direction she wanted him to go in, back up to the front door. At the door, she found Goliath sitting at the top step and Thaddeus on the railing, staring at her. She quietly explained to both that they needed to stay together. Muggs just barked at her in complete indifference, or maybe it was an argument, saying, "Yeah? And who'll look after Mac?" She hated that sense of impending danger. She sent Mac another text. "Let me know you're okay." She pushed the animals inside the house, and it was like chasing a herd of cats instead of just one, as everybody refused to go in. She couldn't shut her front door because one or another of her animals were still outside. Finally, she raised both hands in frustration and asked, "What's wrong with you guys?" Just then, she heard a door slam at her neighbor's. She looked over to see Richard glaring at her. She gave him half a smile and a little wave. "Hello." He just glared at her harder. She shrugged. "Sorry. Am I disturbing you?" "You're always disturbing me, all those darn trucks and all those men," he said with a heavy shake of his head. "It's near impossible to do anything with all that commotion." She frowned. "The moving men?" She paused for a moment, but he never responded. "That should be much better now," she said. "They loaded up a lot of furniture, but they're done now." He just rolled his eyes at her. "And the media?" She waved at the cul-de-sac. "Look. It's clear," she said. In the back of her mind, though, she was overjoyed because chances were it wouldn't last. He had his hands in fists as he stared at her across their lawns. "It's clear now," he snapped. "But it sure as heck hasn't been clear very much since you arrived. This used to be a nice, peaceful area." "I'm sure it'll go back to normal soon," she said in a soothing tone. "How's your wife?" He just sniffed, walked inside, and slammed the door again. "I guess we're still not friends," she said with a half-laugh to the animals. "Another time, maybe." She motioned at Thaddeus to get up on her shoulder. He walked up her arm and said, "Thaddeus is okay. Thaddeus is okay." His tone was bleak, sad, and it gave her goosebumps to see the animals' reactions. He made an odd wailing sound. "Thaddeus is okay," she murmured, stroking the feathers on his back. "Mac is fine. He'll be coming back." At that, Muggs barked. She groaned and asked, "What am I supposed to do? Run after him?" And once that idea got in the back of her head, she couldn't let it go. "We don't know where he went," she snapped. Except she did know. He was heading back to the police station. "Fine," she said when the animals just glared at her. She walked inside, grabbed her keys and purse, locked the front door, and motioned toward the car. As one, the cat, dog, and bird moved together. She opened the driver's side door, and they hopped up and moved over. Goliath insisted on taking the passenger's seat, making sure Muggs ended up in the footwell, but even he didn't seem to mind. And that worried Doreen even more. With Thaddeus on her shoulder, she turned on the engine, backed out of the driveway, and drove out of the cul-de-sac. She also hit dial on Mac's number, letting it ring. He never picked up. She followed the road, thinking of the easiest and most common way he would take to the station. Soon she heard ambulances and her heart froze. She sped up and headed toward the siren sounds. As soon as she saw his vehicle, with the front end smashed and parked off on the side of the road, she pulled up on the sidewalk and hopped out, making sure the animals were locked inside. Waiting for a break in the traffic, she ran across to several police officers, Mac standing in the middle of them. She cried out, "Mac!" He turned to look at her, and then his face lit up with surprise. "What are you doing here?" She spread her arms out wide and said, "You could have answered my call." We were worried about you." He pulled out his phone, looked down and sighed. "My phone's not working. Probably from the accident." She pointed at her car and he looked over to see Muggs and Goliath, their faces plastered against the glass, and somewhere around the headrest was Thaddeus. "They went crazy after you left. You saw Muggs racing down the road behind you, didn't you? They wouldn't stop pestering me. They wouldn't leave me alone," she said. "I had to get them all in the vehicle and follow you. As far as they were concerned, you were in danger." Chester and Arnold, who appeared to be helping Mac at the accident scene, came over after hearing that. "Seriously?" Arnold asked, pushing his hat back off his head. Doreen nodded. They knew Mac was in danger. And this proves they were right. She stared at his vehicle and groaned. "What happened? Did you go too fast and wrap around a lamppost or something?" At that, Chester had a hard time smothering his grin. Mac snapped, "No, I wasn't going too fast, and no, I didn't hit a lamppost. Somebody tried to run me off the road." She stared at him and then looked at his car and wondered. She tried to school her expression into something that looked like compassion, but all that came out was, "Are you sure? Because your vehicle wasn't damaged in that way." He sighed. "You aren't a forensic specialist," he said patiently. "And you're not a cop." "No," she responded in a dry tone. "But even I can see the front end of the driver's side is where the damage is. Anybody trying to run you off the road would have hit the back of your car." "Quite true," he said, "unless they tried to overtake me on the road and then to force me off the road by coming in really tight and hitting my front end." "But only if you were jerking toward him," she said, "so you smashed into him." This time, he fisted his hands on his hips and glared at her. "I turned to stop myself from being forced into the ditch," he said, "and yes, my front end did clip his back end." She was already looking around for whoever had dared to run Mac off the road. "Did you catch him?" she cried out, peering through the crowd. "Surely he's not already down at the station, is he?" "I didn't catch him," he said. "My vehicle gave up the ghost and he took off." "Drat. But it was a truck, wasn't it?" He looked at her in surprise. "What makes you think it's a truck?" "Because the front end of your car is badly damaged. You probably caught the rear end of his truck bed, and with a decent steel bumper, your car couldn't even begin to beat that competition. It was an old truck." "Did you get the license plate?" "Of course I did. Remember? I'm a police officer." She just crossed her arms over her chest. "And remember, I'm the caretaker of the animal menagerie who wouldn't let me rest because they thought you were in trouble," she roared. At that, silence enveloped the group. And then Mac laughed. She just glared at him, and she was so angry she didn't know what to do, so she stomped her foot. At that, Chester and Arnold guffawed, both turning away out of politeness. But Mac had absolutely no problem. He reached out, snagged her up, and gave her a great big hug. When he set her back down again, not only was she limp from the power of his embrace, but she was also very pleased, enough so that she worried it would be evident to all. He grinned at her and said, "Thank you. Glad to hear you care." "I don't care," she snapped. "Didn't you just hear me? I said the animals care." On that note, salvaging whatever pride she had left, she spun on her heels and went across the road. Instantly Mac grabbed her by the shoulders and dragged her back to safety as a great big car roared past. He groaned and said, "Could you please watch where you're going?" And just to make sure, he waited until there was a break in traffic. Then he escorted her to her car and waited while she got in. He bent down at that point and smiled at her, his hand connecting with each of the animals in tow, letting them know he was fine. "I'm okay," he said. "Go home and rest. And you take care of Guido," she said. "Because his truck just ran you off the road." And she gave him a fat smile and took off, leaving him standing in the road, staring after her.